Welcome to another webinar by K-Tech Labs. Today we're talking about how to tackle the rising cybersecurity threats, especially in buildings. And we've got some amazing guests today to sort of walk us through how they approach it, some of the things that they're doing within their business, and this is also a passion for the guests that we have. So let's start with the intros. I'll start with Andrew first. Andrew, who's head of Canadian markets at WiredScore. I'm going to read the bio so I don't miss out on anything. So if I'm looking away, you guys know I'm making sure I read the awesome bios that we got. So here goes. Andrew's been a part of the commercial real estate industry in Canada for over a decade. Most of those years were spent as a broker representing tenants in commercial office space across many industries. He then managed the data needs of major accounts for CoStar Group. Currently, Andrew oversees a Canadian business for WiredScore, the company behind Wired Certification and the global rating platform for digitally connectivity in commercial real estate. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
On to our next guest, Farah, founder of the Futura Fund and also 2020 president of the Toronto Crew. Farah and I met, I think, I was going to say last summer, but it feels like
COVID. That's
way before COVID. The time before COVID is a blank. So glad you're here. And as the founder of Futura Funds, Farah works with both technology startups and corporate clients to develop strategies and best practices on how best to integrate technology and innovation into the commercial real estate industry using a collaborative approach. In addition to that, she's also active in the commercial real estate industry, and she currently serves as a president for Toronto Crew and treasurer for NAIOP, Greater Toronto, and I'm pretty sure there's a cooler way to say it, and I didn't do it. Farah is also very passionate and committed to supporting diversity and inclusion initiatives as an advocate in her current and previous companies. She also speaks on this topic across industry events and conferences, and as a member of the RealPAC's Diversity and Inclusion Committee. So thank you so much for joining us, Farah.
Yeah, thank you for having
And
me.
we've got Harsha, CEO and founder of K-Tech Labs, brings over 25 years of cybersecurity expertise into the industry. She's worked for some really big clients, Tata included one of them, Bentall, and now she's leading K-Tech Labs into this post-COVID world where real estate and cybersecurity is becoming a very hot topic, and her expertise seems to line up really nicely for what's happening in the world today. And finally, as your host, my name is Satish Bala. My background is marketing and advertising, and I've been fortunate enough to build and exit a couple of tech companies. And I'm currently helping K-Tech Labs in the role of a CMO, helping bring the message to the market, and also helping clients really figure out how to minimize their cybersecurity threats when it comes to real estate. So that's the gang. And we've got a great team of folks that have signed up. Recognize a lot of the names from LinkedIn. So thank you so much for joining us. So that's sort of my intro for you guys. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you.
So I was thinking we'll dive right into the topic because I know we have lots to cover today, and we want to get everybody talking as fast as we can. So right off the bat, I think this is for everybody, and maybe we'll start with Andrew and work around the room. But when you look at sort of real estate and what's happening before COVID, after COVID, and also just prop tech in general, is the industry taking like cybersecurity threats to properties seriously? Like, is that still a side conversation? Is it coming to the forefront on the table? Where is this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been on our industry's radar for quite some time, but I think there's been a lot of questions around how to think about it. I think what's happened through the pandemic, and as we kind of hopefully move through and past it, is kind of two main things as far as I'm concerned. I think we've seen or real estate owners and operators will realize as their tenants are moving back into their buildings that their tenants' requirements have had to evolve, right? So a lot of the companies that have struggled when everyone was forced to work from home are those whose tech stacks hadn't necessarily evolved at the same rate as, you know, your quote unquote tech companies. And so their due diligence and how data gets in and out of the buildings they occupy is going to become more top of mind. I think the other thing that is absolutely going to continue to advance this trend is, and it's where my fellow panelists maybe have even more, expertise than myself, but is as we look to the solutions that are going to help us keep safer and healthier buildings, needless to say, technology can play a huge factor in that, and huge, so understanding, how to take a step back and ensure those solutions can be implemented in also a cyber secure way is something that I think will have accelerated an already existing trend.
Well said, man. Farah?
Yeah, I'll just add to that, I think before, when we think about cybersecurity, we often think of someone sitting, running an IT room and putting up all these firewalls. And really, we've come into a world where pretty much every activity we do somehow is enabled through technology. And that existed before COVID. And now, even post-COVID, it's even more so. Even look at the platform that we're currently using. People are using this to run their business now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when we think about building specifically in real estate, prior to COVID, just taking a step back on the idea and thinking about technology in buildings, technology was infused into various parts of business for sure, especially in the building operation systems and automation systems. But all of a sudden in the last several years now, this concept of prop tech emerged. And no one really knew what it meant, but really it is just technology that's related to the commercial real estate industry. But there's technology being infused across so many parts of the business. So where it used to start from just sort of your building operation systems, it's now morphed into also tenant engagement apps. So ways in which, a tenant in a building can communicate with the building and with the owner. People are using it for virtual touring, all sorts of things. And so this prop tech world really started to, take hold prior to COVID. And then COVID hit, and I think people really recognized that while before COVID, technology was somewhat a nice to have in many parts of the business, it became a must have almost overnight. And so for myself in the business that I'm in, conversations that I was having with, landlords, owners, managers prior to COVID around technology were, oh, that's great, but, we don't really have any real impetus to have to innovate. The more progressive groups obviously were, but, other parts of the business were kind of slow to adopt new technologies. I think overnight that's changed. The adoption rate has gone up, but I think it's changed out of now necessity, right? They say necessity is the mother of invention. And all of a sudden, a lot of businesses have realized that not only do I need these technologies, or I'd like these technologies, I need them to run my business, even just to meet the status quo. So they're not just a nice to have, they're now a must have. So as we think about cybersecurity, if we're going to start bringing in all of these different technology-enabled solutions to run the business, but also to manage through COVID and then post-COVID,
right.
And many of them are quite advanced, right? People are the initial response to COVID is let's put up some signs and get people moving into buildings the right way. But eventually it'll be really using technology to manage elevator protocols, traffic flow, air quality, all sorts of things. So as we look to implement more and more technology in our buildings, you really want to make sure that it's being done in a safe, secure way, right. And that the data of the employee, of the building, of the tenant, of every party in that comes into the ecosystem that touches that building in some way, that is secure and that is safe and that is protected. And so all of a sudden, I think now even more so, cybersecurity is sort of a foundational piece to make sure we're connecting in all those technologies.
Right.
Your way. Yeah.
Harsha?
Yeah. So as we know, building sector is going through its own transformation. And with this, we see a unique cybersecurity challenges coming up. Threat landscape is changing. With COVID, we are seeing a drive to deploy low-cost sensors, wired, wireless, to gather data and to maintain health and safety of occupants. We are also seeing a shift from legacy system to more cloud-based system. And all these are adding cyber challenges. For many years, people's idea of cybersecurity is good password and antivirus software. And they still consider it as IT responsibility. But when it comes to buildings, when it comes to technology, they are considering new technologies to achieve operational excellence and tenant retention. But cybersecurity is slowly evolving. They are still considering it as part of IT responsibility, not as part of operational responsibility. And that's the change we are looking for,
Right.
that not as part of IT, but we need to incorporate security in all aspects, right from procurement to operations.
No, well said. And I'm going to take that and jump back to Farah. This idea of like when you set it up, operations and automation and how PropTech started to think about technology, but it's really back to old school of what technology do we need to drive. Post-COVID is there's going to be a lot more new technology introduced for contactless interaction within a building, which means there's going to be more information that's going to be either collected and stored or more ways to interact than ever before. From a cybersecurity perspective and your work on looking at sensors and devices, walk us through sort of what is evolving, some of the pros and cons, and maybe some risks that we should be paying attention to.
Sure. So I'll take one step back before I go right into that question, because this is just how I always like to look at the bigger picture. Right now, if we look at the office market, it just sat empty essentially for the last several months. And we're slowly starting to get people back into space. But there's been a major shift in the thinking. There's become this what's being thrown around as the employee choice model, right? I will choose if I'm going to return to the office when I feel like it is safe and secure to do so. So now, if you think about that, you've really got to create a very compelling case to get people to want to come back in, not to just feel like they have to, but that they want to. We've kind of gone from this landlord-led market to now sort of a tenant-led market where the tenants and the employees have a lot more choice. One of the things that I feel will be crucial and pivotal in creating that confidence in the individual and in the employee to want to come back into space is that it is safe and secure and healthy for them to come back. And that they can feel comfortable that the building is actually managing that, and not just saying they're doing it, that they actually have the technology in place to be able to create that confidence in the end user that, okay, this building is being managed appropriately. So now if we kind of now answer the question, one of the ways in which that's happening is through sensor devices, IoT sensor devices, thermal scanners, air quality scanners, all of these things. And so I think before, building owners rush to just put all of these devices in the building, they have to kind of understand, why they're putting them in, what data they're trying to collect, how that data is going to be used. Will they be having individual data on people? What are the security risks related to that, or privacy risks? And so I think that it's really important for companies to be thinking of how these sensors and what they'll be used for will fit into an overall strategy for managing the return for people into space. But I think if you start thinking even like, post-COVID, so, I like everyone's starting to say pre and post-COVID, but the funny thing is we're still in COVID, right? We're not really post-COVID, right? So when I think about a post-COVID world, I think, we've had everybody really sitting at home for a long time, that there's been behavioral change on how people interact with space. So landlords have a really tall order now to basically compete with the home. Why is it better for you to come to my space, my office, than to work from home? So one of those things is to also make sure and communicate to your end users that actually this is a safe place, but this is a productive place as well. And there's actually proven data that one of those key things, so when we talk about sensors, is that the indoor air quality of a space has a direct correlation on people's cognitive function. And improved cognitive function improves productivity of people. And so as an employer and as an employee as well, knowing that I can go to a space that is going to help me, improve my productivity in the day, I think is really important. So, while there's going to be this balance of what are the right, privacy and security protocols, and, do I really want the building owner collecting all of this information about me as an individual? Right now, I think most of the things that are contemplated are about collecting data as an aggregate, not visualized by the employee. But if we start to say, we can track movements of people through space, that is somewhat individualized. I think that it's the landlord and the building owners and the employer's job to understand that this data will be used to help improve the health and productivity at an individual level. And I, as an individual, would subscribe to that all day long if I knew that this is really going to be for about keeping me safe. So, I think I've answered your question a little bit, but there's a lot to work out on the data side and who owns the data. But there's a lot that can be gained from that collection.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's well said. And when I put on my marketing hat, having been in that space, when personalization first happened, everybody was like, what do you mean I'm opting into marketing data? But it's not about me, but it's about a neighborhood. But then what, my needs are. And I think we've learned that there's a balance, and there's always going to be folks that try to abuse it. And there's folks that do it for the right reason to help me have a better experience with the brand. And I think we're starting to look at that similarly. Harsha, from a risk assessment perspective, has it now added much more complexities and layers of risk assessment versus what we did before, where we kind of knew walking in, we were looking at the HVAC, we're looking at the parking, we're looking at the cameras, but now there's going to be stuff in there that we haven't even dreamt of yet.
Yes, yes. And with Internet of Things, IoT, the number of IP devices are increasing. And with these devices, what we have seen is often there is a rush to market, and to be cost competitive, they have minimal security features. So such issues can be exploited by using search engines, internet-based search engines that find IoT devices and exploit. So when it comes to selecting these IoT devices, we have to be very careful, like what are the security settings of these devices and how we can deploy following the best practices. Plus, we have also seen increase in wireless device growth, because we all know providing wire data connection to devices is expensive. So there's a shift towards wireless. But when it comes to critical functions like HVAC, your building automation system, the consideration should be based on wired connections to make it more secure, because we all know wireless connections are prone to radio frequency jamming and are very easy to hack.
Man, I'm gonna go change all my passwords right after this call, just to be safe. But that's a great setup to get into Andrew and Wired Score. So, Andrew, tell us about Wired Score, and then the certification that you guys offer. What's the value to the client, and what are the benefits of getting it? And then maybe at the end of it, you said something in the beginning of safer and healthier buildings. I know about safer buildings. I'd love to hear more about healthier buildings, which we can leave at the end. But yeah, tell us about Wired Score.
For sure. I mean, look, we Wired Score is the company behind the only digital connectivity rating platform, right, for commercial real estate. And ultimately, while it was originally founded to solve a bit of a different type of challenge in our industry, which was a lack of transparency between the real estate community and those renting from the real estate community in terms of what was this technological experience that I can expect, right? So this was actually in New York when Silicon Valley started to migrate into New York, and every broker could answer what a rental rate would be and what vacancy rates are and labor pools, and but then the more technical questions they were asking were everyone kind of was wondering how to best answer those. What's interesting is, like, through our evolution, what we've started to do, and I kind of maybe tie it back to, cybersecurity, it's a lot of what we talk to our clients about is, and part of our process, if you will, of auditing, existing buildings or helping shape the design of future buildings is, foundational infrastructure is so critically important, right? I mean, if you go and look at a building that was, in its defense, built prior to the internet, being, even incepted, they're not going to have the infrastructure space allocation even to properly house and keep these things secure. So we've seen everything from, you know, fiber demarcation points for an entire building being mounted on a piece of plywood in P1, you know, in plain sight, right? Fiber's glass. Someone can just back into that and you know, the internet's lost for the whole building. But from a cybersecurity, you know, perspective, that poses an even bigger risk, because, you know, a real estate person like myself could find something on Amazon called a Raspberry Pi device and go pull data off those fiber lines, right? So, you know, I think what's interesting to me is, you know, I hear, you know, when we start talking more and more about smart buildings, smart technologies, sometimes I find some real estate companies almost trying to run before they walk, and not looking at that foundational infrastructure can be a big miss, right? And understanding how resilient is the connectivity in your building. You know, how you know, there was an instance in Calgary at the Bow where a Chinese company had gone and you know, I think released about 2,000 square feet in the building in order to get access to the risers and pull data out of the fiber that was running between the building, right? Everyone thinks of the cybersecurity as a tenant thing, a tenant issue, right? You know, you have to have, like Far was saying, all your firewalls are in place and all your networks, and oftentimes those can be very well set up, but there's, you know, the connection to the internet that seems as this abstract cloud-based, out of sight, out of mind thing is a very physical thing. Right. And what the owner is responsible for is all of that infrastructure to get said information from, you know, tenant A's space to the internet, right? And to those clouds and to those things that are very much physical places. So, you know, I guess kind of a roundabout way to say, like, you know, you asked about our certification. I mean, a big part of what we infrastructure, you know, to not just understand how resilient and how, you know, well connected the building is, but how secure it is, right? And as I said, I think these are just questions that owners and operators of commercial real estate are going to get more, right? Something I hear from real estate people is, you know, that makes sense, but, you know, our portfolio, we don't have a lot of tech companies, you know, it's not really, it doesn't matter to my tenants. And it's like, I don't think you have any tenants that don't use the internet to run their businesses, right? I mean, and more, the internet has to sit between them and the platforms they need to run their business, the data they use to run their business. You know, some companies, they haven't migrated to cloud solutions because, you know, they have privacy challenges with the data that they use. And while that makes a lot of sense, and it's a very, you know, good reason, for lack of a better term, for them to have not migrated to those, this pandemic has shown that's not even a good enough reason to not have evolved their tech stack. Because if, you know, if they don't have access to that information as secure as it might be in their office space, they're still unable to run their business. They're still unable to do the things that they need to do for their client base. So, you know, I think, you know, I defer to my fellow panelists here on a lot of the kind of more, you know, building operational, how things will become safer and healthier in the workplace. But I think what we're proud to be able to help our clients with is really almost get to step one before my fellow panelists here can talk about step 2 to 10, and that's foundational infrastructure. That's the security and how these things housed and who has access to what and things of that nature.
No, that's well said, man. And, you know, segging that into Harsha, there has always been a need to make sure the baseline that Andrew talked about is really protected for IT, right? The computers are safe, the firewalls are safe, but nobody's thinking about the thermometer that got connected that's on a Wi-Fi public IP channel that could be now hacked to get to a tenant data. From a risk assessment and penetration testing and things like that, are we seeing clients now looking at both types of systems? What are you seeing from a perspective of, you know, cybersecurity?
Yeah, from a risk assessment and penetration testing point of view, yes. So from a risk assessment, we see that risk assessment helps to uncover the vulnerabilities and the risks that are there in the system. And commonly what we have seen is building owners and managers, they lack the visibility of what kind of devices are there in the building. These IoT devices and asset inventory, because if you don't know what's there in the building, you don't know what are the risks. So risk assessment helps to create the asset inventory and uncover the risk and vulnerabilities. And with penetration testing, it's like a simulation process that we use to assess the building system like HVAC, elevator, access control, and network to identify the security issues. And hackers use the same to identify the security issues and exploit. So before a hacker get into your system, we help to identify the issues and mitigate. So in 2013 or 2014, Google headquarter in Australia. So two researchers were able to get into the building management system because the system was unpatched, was having old unpatched software building automation system running, and was having the default admin password. So they gained the access and they compromised the system, but they didn't disrupted any operations, and they shared their findings with the Google headquarter management team. So with our risk assessment and penetration testing, we help to identify such vulnerabilities that exist in the system.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think, you know, what I take away from what Farah said and what Andrew said and what you're saying is there's new questions that are not being asked as we get into the next phase of this thing. And so I'm going to reword question 6 from what we initially thought of to what I'm hearing from you guys. And what I'd love to get some feedback on is, as the world is changing, you know, in COVID, post-COVID one day, now new sensors, getting your baseline, you know, wired score, rethinking risk and penetration tests. From your opinion, what are maybe some of the questions that people are not asking? Because sometimes we don't know what we don't know until somebody says, hey, are you sure? Because if I can back up into that wire and it breaks, there goes your building internet connectivity. So maybe Andrew, we'll start with you. From what you're seeing from your clients and some of the new folks that you guys are speaking to, what are some of the things that people just don't know how to ask because they never had to?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and it kind of ties to one of the things Harsha said, which was kind of somewhat of where that responsibility is falling, right? This isn't as much an IT professional's responsibility, although it is, but not solely, right? And so I think what I find is the way that we kind of help property managers, let's say, the kind of front line of managing and interacting with tenants, is what I encourage them to do is effectively ask themselves the questions that tenants are now asking more of them, and being able to answer those, you know, correctly, because if you don't understand your building's infrastructure, you may just not even know how to answer it. And then from there, you can get to improving to the point where you're answering it in the way that they're going to be happy with, right? So things like, you know, where is the internet coming into the building? Who runs that service? What kind of service do they offer? And I mean, that as a starting point sounds obvious to people who don't run buildings, but these people have a million things to think about. And traditionally, this is something that's been band-aided over years as tenants ask for different things. And it's, oh, we would like Bell, you know, internet service. Okay, well, call Bell, and if they want to come in, bring them in. That's great. And then the property manager goes, I think I have Bell. I'm not sure where they're coming in, right? So understanding who's in your building, right? Because then that's the next stage as to who has access to the equipment in your building, who owns that equipment, right? Understanding your telecommunications license agreements with your providers. I think one of the things that made me kind of laugh a little bit when I took on managing this business in Canada as traditionally a real estate guy was, as you mentioned in my bio, I spent many years negotiating office leases, you know, with landlords on behalf of tenants, and they're very good at it. They have very good boilerplate leases. They're very successful across the country for good reason. Yet they will sign the boilerplate of an internet service provider because they want to come in the building, right?
Yes,
so they're not doing themselves the same service that they're doing their business in the building. They're not representing themselves well. So we help with kind of boilerplate agreements that make sense for the landlord to help ensure that security. So asking the things that your tenants are going to ask, how things are coming in your building, where that infrastructure is stored, who has access to it, and how does it run through the building, and at those different parts, right? As a riser pathway runs through your building, where can people get access to that at different parts of the building, and how are we keeping that physically, you know, secure from people that shouldn't have access? I think that to me is some of the questions that really can, again, from a foundational infrastructure level, really help set the stage.
That's amazing. Farah, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, I'll add that, right now, a lot of people are rushing to just figure out what they can do, right? Like we kind of had this frenzy of, okay, everything's seemingly different. We want to get people back into buildings safely. We feel like technology might help with that. And I think people need to kind of pause and stop and ask the real questions of, okay, before we just implement all these technologies, again, do we have the infrastructure to support even bringing these technologies in? That's a baseline question that I think a lot of people don't even think about. Do we have the bandwidth? Do we need to increase our bandwidth? If we bring this technology in, what are all the security considerations? How does that technology communicate with the other technologies that we already have or integrate into that? Will it speak to each other, or will it, combat each other, right? So to say. And so I think these are kind of like high level thinking that everyone needs to do before they rush out and start just adopting various technologies. I think the other question that is being, I know your question is what is not being asked, but the one question that is really being asked that no one has the answer to, which I think is kind of the same thing, is to say that where do the costs land? Like who has to pay for all this stuff? So I wanted to just, if we can, when we chatted briefly, all of us, I shared this image. I'm going to share it now. Oh,
Wait.
evil.
I will let you share it. Hold on
Perfect.
1 second. All participants. Uh, all these new buttons you got to click to enable things like sharing.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. So I can do that now. And so this is an image that, came out early days of COVID. So like, mind you, maybe it's potentially a little bit dated, but it's a good framework to start thinking about who really needs to be looking after what in the building, right? So you've got your tenant space, you've got the building itself that the landlord manages. Some things are sort of short term that we need to just start cleaning our buildings and sanitizing more often. And then some things are these technologies that we've been talking about today, sensors, air quality, thermal detection, all of these various things. And so I think the questions that are being asked are, well, whose responsibility is it? Is it my own responsibility? Do I need all of this whole gamut of technologies to begin with, right? Like, is this actually necessary? So I kind of liked looking at this image because it kind of helped map out, roughly where some of the responsibilities lie. So I think these are the questions people need to ask, specifically as it relates to more of the blue and purple on this screen, which is the more technology enabled stuff.
Right.
The other stuff, is getting figured out already. People are starting to go back into buildings, but for the longer term, these are the kinds of things that the conversations that I know are being had between tenants and landlords right now is who's gonna, and do we, if a building owner implements some of the things in the bottom right quadrant in purple, do they then charge that back to the tenants, right? How does that work, right? So these are all the kinds of questions that are being asked and somewhat worked through. And I think it requires a lot more collaboration between tenants and landlords than ever before to figure out, is it a cost sharing model too, right? Because
Right.
These are some of these technologies that the tenants want to have. They can't afford to pay for them just themselves, and vice versa. They need the landlord to actually implement them into the building. So yeah, it should be somewhat of a cost sharing agreement. So yeah, I'll unshare now, but I just thought I'd share that because it does provide a bit of a framework, I think, about some of the questions people can start asking.
No, I think it's a great way to just look at the big picture, because like both of you said, sometimes we focus on what we know, and then some people will sort of help us think about the things that we don't know. But when you get the big picture, you start to think about, where is your building in this color pattern? What questions am I not wondering about? Harsha, similar to the work that we do here, some of it is very reactive. I just got hacked. Oh my gosh, what do I do to help me not get hacked? Because I heard somebody got hacked. So what are some of the things people are not asking?
Yes, I see this question as tied to responsibility. And I always say cybersecurity is everyone's responsibility, be it landlord, be it tenant. So ideally, landlord should have measures in place, as it will be the tenant who will suffer if the building is compromised in some way. Therefore, questions like, are landlords holding personal information of employees? What kind of systems are there? What kind of practices are being followed? And how is the personal information exchanged between the systems? Even tenants are also responsible for their own system. And we see access control and CCTVs are sometimes deployed and owned by tenants. So they are also responsible if their systems get hacked, and that leads to the building system getting compromised. Plus, when it comes to building management, facility team and building management team should ask questions to their vendors as what kind of policies you follow, what kind of cyber practices you follow when you manage our systems. So simple things like, do you have a policy to onboard and offboard users? What happens if an employee leaves organization? Do you disable their account or they can still access their account? What kind of password policies you have? And with COVID and even before COVID, we see many systems are being remotely accessed for after hour services. So building management and facility team should ask questions like, who are accessing our systems? What software you are using and from where you are using. Is it a secure connection or the person is sitting in Starbucks and using free Wi-Fi? So it's more of a responsibility thing when it comes to, asking questions about policies and practices.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. We got one last question for our panelists. And this is really just me trying to understand the changes in the world that you guys are seeing. Because prior to COVID, you probably had a great process of who your target was, who you spoke to, who was at the table to help you help them. Now that the world is changing a little bit, I'm curious to see if there's other folks that are coming to the table, meaning, is IT and OT and a new hybrid role for health and safety coming to the table now as we look at like, how do we merge roles and thought leadership together to help tenants and things like that? Or is it still fairly isolated where it's my world versus your world and like, we'll have a Zoom meeting, but not really? So maybe Farah from your side, and then we'll head to Andrew. But what are some of the new players that are coming to the table, or in your opinion, should be coming to the table?
So great question, because like I said, I noticed a massive shift, pre and post COVID, where before the idea around technology was really relegated to the tech person and or the innovation person in the organization, right? If they happen to have an innovation person, which is like this all encompassing term sometimes. But now it's like everyone that's involved, because so many of the solutions for just managing the status quo now are technology enabled solutions. You've got everyone from, property management, building management, the IT team, HR, right? Because they're managing people in spaces and they need to understand how that's going to impact, onboarding, training, getting people up to the office, all of these things. Like everyone has literally had to come to the table and have a little bit of a deeper understanding of technology and how it's used and managed, and a kind of a working baseline of understanding that, and also the benefits of some of these technologies. So I've really seen a shift where it's become a lot more holistic. Even senior management is weighing in. Some of these technologies, when we think about them, are expensive as well, right? So you've really got, everyone in the process now in a real estate company thinking about technology differently. And then you've also got that kind of relationship with the employer or your tenant, right? The tenants in the building needing to understand how they're going to interact with the various technologies, or how they'll plug in or whatnot to the various platforms landlords are thinking of implementing. So I think, before it was kind of a smaller group of people, and now it's literally infiltrating every part, every facet of the business now more than before. Right. And I think people care. Now I think even the individual employee wants to know that there's certain things in place, and even if they want to have an app that they can plug in and plug into the building's system, so to say, get real-time data, right? I would, one day love to walk into a building that says, oh, Farah, today's air quality is at 77% take elevator to, maybe wait 10 minutes to go down to the food court. All of these things where you can really interact with the building in a great way. To do that, you need technology, you need the data, you need the insights, and so that those kinds of decisions also impact, your food court operators, all sorts of people, right? Everybody in the ecosystem of the building is in. So
no, and that's a great way. I mean, I dream of that day. You walk in, it's like Back to the Future, part 1, 2, and 3. But all of that still needs a great wired infrastructure. I'm setting it up for Andrew.
Yeah.
I tried.
No, I appreciate it. No, I mean, I'll echo broadly what Farah is saying. I think, a lot of these things happened in a reactionary way traditionally in our industry. It fell to the individual property manager on a building. All I need, like, if I can share insight, when I look at the kind of way real estate companies may have made a decision around something like our certification or the services, ancillary services that we bring, it might have been a forward-thinking property manager at building X. And now I think what we're seeing is these types of things cannot be ignored, and therefore it's brought higher and higher up the chain. And so now you're having kind of asset managers overseeing a portfolio or a portion of a portfolio saying, I need to look at this on a portfolio basis. This is not, a piecemeal, that building is more important than that building. This is something that needs to be looked at holistically. And I think that's very positive. The other trend, I think, and hope, and Farah and I were talking about this, is, we were joking, like, our industry gets such a bad rap for being so old school and so slow to change and slow to adopt technology and all of these things. For better or for worse, I think this pandemic has proven to our industry that we can be very quick to change when we frankly have no choice. So I think I've seen the decision-making process, the stakeholders involved shift to a point where I believe it's not going to be overnight, but these larger organizations particularly will become more nimble. They'll become more open to change, understanding that it's not, to Farah's previous point, it's not a nice to have, it's not a maybe one day, or I have someone in an innovation role over there who's probably been trying to preach this stuff to the company for a year with little to no traction. This is now something that the organization sees the inherent need, necessity for, and then therefore, as that importance rises, so do the people involved in those decisions, which actually can affect wider scope, wider spread change.
Yeah, which is great. I think the conversations are going to open up new thoughts into things that, as we venture into sensor-based data, automation, health and safety. We can't solve it all. So we need more people at the table to help at least ask the right questions. One of the questions that came up, I think is perfect for Harsha. So I'm going to flip that over to you, Harsha, from our team today. But this idea of property management as a sector, are they starting to understand monitoring and the importance of continuous monitoring? I know we just brought on a vendor for our solution to do 24/7 first response, but the question was, are people paying attention to it? Is it a sign of maturity? Are they caring about monitoring and continuous support? What's your thought on that?
Well, I would say it's still evolving because we are still using legacy systems and silo systems. So, your building automation system is on a separate network. Your cameras are on a separate network. Your elevators are on a separate network. And it's very difficult to provide a continuous monitoring and control system as one complete solution in such a case. So it's still evolving, but yes, we are seeing the talks coming up as how I can monitor my system remotely, and is there a way I can get an alert if they see any anomaly or if they see any intrusion. So yes, talks are on, and as Satish mentioned, so we have partnered with the industry leading provider for remote control and monitor for operational networks. So you put a solution in a building and you monitor all your systems. And in case of any anomaly detected, it raises alert. But to install such a solution, the building needs to be prepared. The network needs to be modified. You need to have one consolidated view of the entire network. So networks where there are silo systems, it's difficult to provide such solution. But when a building has consolidated network or is ready to do a network change, yes, these solutions are possible, but still it's evolving. It's at a very early stage.
Awesome. I think that's a wrap, folks. It's great, great conversation. The key takeaway for me, and hopefully everybody watching, is there's always going to be somebody trying to attack anything of value. And as we sort of build out these technologies and partnerships, folks like you guys are leading the front line, thinking around how to create continuous protection as people try to do the opposite. And I think more of this conversation needs to happen. Maybe there's another question. Give me 1 second. So there's another question on what are your thoughts on physical security, like uniformed security officers? How do they tie into the discussion, and what role do they play in the future of building safety, cybersecurity, and access control? What partnership opportunities, if any, do you see between physical and cybersecurity companies, and how can they work together? Great question. I didn't even connect the dots between physical security and cybersecurity. Why don't we toss it to Farah first, and then we'll see if other folks want to jump in on it.
Sure. While I'm not an expert on this, I'll offer my thoughts on it. I think there's naturally a way for them to be working in collaboration, right? Our technologies, the cyber technologies or the virtual technologies that exist are really there to help people, help and enable people to do their jobs better. This includes the security and staff physically at the building. Their ability to have access to the reporting, the data, the insights that will help them do their job better, to help manage flow of people, traffic of people, things like that physically in the building will be crucial. And you'll always need a physical kind of component to any strategy. In the end of the day, we are people, right? So while an elevator, a sign might tell you go this way, like who listens, right? So you're going to need, you're still going to need the physical security staff to help manage people in spaces, but allowing them to be enabled to do their job really well because they've got potentially technology resources that support what they're seeing behind the scenes, so to say, as to what's happening in the building, what they're seeing on the cameras, but what they're also maybe seeing on a dashboard on an iPad that says, okay, traffic's building up here, whatever it may be, like being able to have the real-time data that's being brought in through a sensor network, but that enables the then security personnel to make decisions that need to be made by a human.
Right. No, that's well said. Yeah, that's well said. Herschel, we got another question, which I think might be interesting from the work we're doing. We talked about cost a little bit with what Farah said, right? But if social distancing is happening and people are slowly coming back to the buildings, or even this notion of like, why do I come back to the buildings, is securing the building, the budget to do that kind of stuff. Is that something that's going to be impacted this year? Because nobody's going to come back to the building. So why am I worried about cybersecurity in my building? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say when it comes to cybersecurity, people often think that cybersecurity is an expensive affair, but they don't realize that this is really important, because it's not if, it's like when you get hacked, and the cost of getting hacked or the cost of a cyber attack is much more. There's a direct and an indirect cost associated. Direct cost of legal, there are legal implications to your tenants and occupants in the building, legal cost of your tenants and your vendors, and then there is cost to investigate the incident, and the cost to repair and update the system, and indirect cost of brand damage and low leasing value. So if we compare the cost of the ongoing cyber measures and we compare it with the cost of getting hacked, it's much less. And we have seen an increase in people showing interest in cybersecurity as we deploy more and more sensors and CCTVs. There is a need to look for measures to make the system secure. Now imagine if people are there in a building and there's a cyber attack and people gets locked in a building. Well, I would share a small incident. It's not related to any sensor or a system. So one of my property manager friends shared this with me. Someone installed a printer on a free Wi-Fi in their building. Hacker got into the free Wi-Fi and printed a bomb threat. They had to evacuate the building because it could be for real. After that, they analyzed and found that they got hacked and it was a hoax. But they had to evacuate the building, and there was a huge financial implications, legal implications, and a brand damage. So to avoid such incidents, it's better to invest in cybersecurity and make sure the systems are secure and are not easy to compromise.
Yeah, I remember that example. Jumping over to you, Andrew, playing a bit of a legal advice for us. I sent you that quick question. From an indemnification perspective, as you're talking to companies about the backbone, the data that's all going to travel through this internet connection that you guys are helping certify and things like that, is the cost of this stuff being passed down? Is it something you're starting to see in leases?
Yeah, I truthfully, I mean, it's been several years since I've dug into a commercial lease, but I can tell you that I think the prevalence of how much this is affecting the day-to-day tenant, right? Again, so what is every tenant going to look for versus the Googles or the Ciscos of the world as an office tenant? And I think because of that shift to be the answer to that being effectively everyone, I do see the indemnification requirements certainly shifting, if you will, and being passed to tenants. I mean, I think it speaks to the fact that the cybersecurity risk is really going to fall on each individual business, how they mitigate that risk, be it through insurance, things of that nature. I mean, there's obviously companies, like Ridge Canada that are leading in this space of how to actually look and think about cybersecurity from an insurance perspective, because I think you're going to see that responsibility fall more and more to the individual tenants as landlords look to obviously mitigate their own liability in that way.
Nice, man. Yeah, it's a great legal, non-legal answer. I love it. But I think it's very interesting to look at what cost is being passed down, right? One last question. I flipped it over to Farah. Also, guys, I'm flipping these based on what I've heard from you already. So if this is a question that you want to jump in on too, feel free to. I'm making real-time editor cuts on the fly. But Farah, this was an interesting question, around space usage. And the question is around, what's the panel's thought around workspace as a service to enable the commercial real estate business and create an auxiliary revenue stream, and any cybersecurity issues around that comes from personal and corporate tenant details, right, that are in there. I interpret it as like, is there a new WeWork model that we can sort of think through?
So we could do a whole panel on this, but I will try to answer this quickly. I actually very much believe that the industry is moving towards this concept, space as a service. I think that before, landlords very much just provided a box and tenants worked out of that box, and there wasn't really too much ownership on the landlord to be creative and innovative. And that actually allowed the WeWorks of the world to come in and capture, a group of people who wanted more flexibility, a little bit more of a cooler branded space, technology enabled spaces, all of these kinds of things. Now, with so many people working from home and large corporates also deciding to keep some of their employees at home, a lot of what I'm hearing anecdotally through my friends in brokerage is big companies. So we know that, WeWork originally catered very much to a tech and entrepreneurial startup, world of companies, but eventually they actually have big corporates wanting to be in their spaces as well. What's happening in the leasing world right now is you've got people saying, look, okay, I originally had 100,000 square feet. I'll now take 50,000 square feet, but I still want 50,000 available to me in a flexible way. Mm-hmm. Now, whether that's offered by a WeWork, that's one thing. I think it's a missed opportunity for a landlord to not allocate a portion of their building towards flexibility. Yes, it is harder to value that space in terms of, to get, real estate is valued on future cash flows. of long-term leases in place. If you start switching to a 1 month model of a leasing model or a 1 day model, similar to hotel, it becomes harder to value that space. But there's a lot of bright minds out there right now working on that very thing, to figure out, how do you value space as a service? How do you value flexibility? One of the ways I think that's done is through brand, right? Branding these spaces. Like, there's a reason why people want to go to a Four Seasons versus a Budget Inn, or maybe they want to go to a Budget Inn because they just want a no frills place to lay their head at night. I think there's room for various brands and players to come in at different segments of the market to offer different types of experiences, and to really just create more of a brand and experience for the end user in that building. And I do feel that, you know, if you think quickly about WeWork, what happened was the landlord rented to WeWork then rented the space back out for much higher. The deltas were insane. And so why would a landlord give that up? Why would you do that? That makes no sense. Bring in an operator, a brand manager, a WeWork potentially even, to manage the space for you, to create the WeWork-like experience, but you are, you know, somehow collaboratively revenue sharing in the lease up of that space. Right. You know, I think we're going to see more and more of that, and where building owners will work with a brand owner. You know, Regis is out there, all these different groups are out there, convene. There's new groups coming that are specifically just offering management. They just want a management fee. That's all they want. They'll manage your space for you. They'll rent it out. They'll take a management fee. So I think there's a real opportunity to focus, and this is what the public wants, right? Yeah. The reality is, real estate's, I think, had it a little bit backwards to say the output of your building is actually the people inside of it. And so you've got to really cater to what those people want. And if the demand is that we want more flexibility, we want technology-enabled spaces, we want beautiful spaces, we want flexible lease terms, we want to be able to be there one day but not be there the next day, let's give it to them. This is what people want, and even the big corporates want it. So like I said, I'm super passionate about this. Maybe this is webinar number 2, because we can talk about this all day long.
No, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Harsha, any closing comments and notes from you before we thank everybody?
Yeah, I would say follow cybersecurity guidelines in your day-to-day operations.
Awesome. Look, thank you so much, guys, for spending some time with us. And we really value 1 hour with us. Lots of knowledge bombs. I can't wait to get our editing team to cut it all up and turn this into a 6-month social media blast with everything you guys have said. So we really appreciate your time.